Welcome to Tequi Vida with Dr. J, where life and technology intersect. Welcome back to another exciting episode of Tequi Vida. Today we have a special guest with us, Lisette Gomez. She is an incredible friend and she is a licensed clinical social worker. Lisette, I did go into your LinkedIn and I did see that you had something like PPSC and CWA. You could talk more about that in a bit. Lisette currently works as a counselor. She's really focused on helping students from all fronts and aspects. So I do want to, really give a warm welcome to Lisette.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Lisette, I always start this podcast with asking our folks to tell us a little bit about yourself and what motivated you to pursue your career. Do you want to talk briefly about your career, whether it's in social work or counseling?
Sure. That's a loaded question, so I'll try to keep it nice and short. But I think as a lot of people who are in social work and in the helping profession, it stems really from, the way that you grew up and the things that you've experienced. And for me, I am, like you said, I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I got my master's degree in social work, and I firmly believe that the only reason why I was able to achieve that is because of the people that were there for me and supported me during some of the more toughest parts of my life. And so because of that, I kind of grew a passion in helping. And I think a lot of people in social work will tell you the same thing, that somebody helped us. And so we are here to help others.
By the way, everyone, me and Lisette, we both went to Cal State University, Dominguez Hills. And I'm curious, Lisette, is this something you wanted to do as when you were a kid?
I feel like I've always kind of knew I was going to be in that helping profession, again, because of my experiences in my life. I feel that I have a passion for that. And even though I started with criminal justice and I thought I wanted to be like a police officer, I quickly realized that was not my passion. That was not where I wanted to be. And after doing a little bit of research and changing career paths, I'm exactly where I think I need to be.
Were you ever exposed to anyone that is in your field right now that kind of guided you?
Yes and no. I know that when people think of social work, they automatically think of agencies such as like DCFS and things like that, where, it's more of a, you don't want to know a social worker, right? You don't want somebody to take your kids. But as I became more exposed to the actual profession, I started kind of looking for those people for guidance. And that's when I noticed that, social work is so broad and it encompasses so much. And so you can be a social worker in many different settings. When it comes to like policy, it'll come to being like a school social worker, things like DCFS or some sort of, agency that you can work with, clinical work, advocacy. So it's so broad. So I realized after a while, after I knew what social work was, that I did know a lot of social workers, and those are the people I vibe with. Those are my people.
No, and I have to ask, I actually, and navigating college, and I touched briefly on this. I didn't know what it was that I wanted to do with my life growing up. I remember getting into technology, and I knew it just fell into it, and I've always liked it, but I didn't have exposure to it. And we were just talking about that, having that level of exposure that really helps you get in through the door. I was curious because, we always think about how do we get to where we are when we're kids? Like it's hard for me to think about, hey, I want to be a social worker when I'm 5 years old, right? When I was 5 years old, I wanted to be a firefighter or something like that. Something that I thought was cool during that time. But here we are, we're doing these professions because we care. And I love that you went into like our experiences growing up and what we lived that really gets us to where we are. I know we were briefly talking about that before we started, which is kind of what we went through and what we, lived through. Right now, and we will get into the intersection of technology and the social work field or mental health field, but I always like to start off with our story and thinking about like, what I've known you for quite some time. And I told myself, what, I need to like talk to Lisette because mental health or social work or all these different terms that are coming up are really critical in today's landscape, especially as I think about people like ourselves, right? We are often, I was reflecting with my wife about what it is that, leads us to where we are and why do we think a certain way. And for me, I never had exposure to mental health or the social work field. It was more of like, I better listen to my mom and behave, even though I had ADHD, but they don't want to take me to the doctor. They don't want me to see someone from the school, like this school a clinical worker, because they were like, no, they're gonna like take you away. There's all these myths behind it that really kept me away from wanting to get that level of support. I think as we're kind of, generational thing moving on and really providing that level of awareness, I think we're really breaking those barriers to make sure that people know that this is here to support them, right? To help them. Like your job is helping students, like really helping them understand how critical it is for them to do what it is that we would want them or hope for them to do to be in a better place in the future. So we will touch briefly on, and I will segue into something that I wanted to talk about, which is really asking you about technology. The podcast is Tequi Vida, and I do want to talk about technology and in particular mental health and ask you about that because we talk a lot about it. The intersection of it. I'm gonna just have an open-ended question. How do you think technology has impacted the mental health field and you don't have to be, it's basically what you've read, what you see. It could be positive and negative.
Yeah. That's such a hot topic, I think, when it comes to mental health and technology, because a lot of people automatically talk about like social media, right? That's kind of like the big thing when it comes to mental health. I think the positive with that is that there's a lot of more exposure and acceptance of, if you don't feel good or well, speak up, ask for help. And if you're seeing a therapist, you're not crazy, right? That's the one thing that, especially us with being
Yeah.
Latinos, that's like, oh, está loco. Right?
Hmm.
That's the first thing that
They're
they
gonna
say
take
is,
us in.
yeah. So I think that with social media, it's definitely opened up more of like the acceptance and breaking down the stigma with mental health. But I also see the opposite of that, right? Where you see our young children, our young adults that are being influenced by these personalities, right? These social media personalities that portray a life of like everything is perfect, right? Nothing's wrong. They use Photoshop, they use all sorts of different apps, right? To make themselves seem perfect. And
Perfect.
in reality, that's not the case. And so I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we've seen, especially for me, because I work with children, right? And they're still very malleable, their minds are still very influential. So I think that's the tough part when it comes to the intersection of like tech. Yeah.
No, and I think, and we could unpack social media. And I'll tell you, listen, I look at my daughter, my daughter's 10 years old, and we talk about anything that comes to like getting support, getting therapy, all these different access that that I wish I had growing up, and demystifying it. I say it because Audrey, she is exposed. She is exposed to technology. It's in front of her. She is exposed to her friends that are probably in social media. Right now, she doesn't have a social media account. I don't approve of it right now, but I do talk to her because she comes to me. She's like, Dad, I need help, or I want to talk about this and I would like to talk to somebody about this. I'm like, by all means, do it. I do it. Really creating or going away from that stigma or that stereotype where our family used to say they're going to take you in or they're going to lock you up for thinking that way. For Audrey, what the other thing that you touched on that I think the good and the bad or the ugly is, we talk about social media, the level of exposure that's in there. And in a lot of folks now you start seeing cyberbullying, right? When we were growing up, or when I was growing up, cyberbullying didn't exist because we didn't have devices, but there was bullying. It was in the campus, in person, you would see it then in there. And not to compare either or, but I do think that, that's happening. And for me, it's like, how do you tackle that, right? Because there like social media police. I know we throw out that term a lot, and we could talk about all that's happened around that, but it has impacted how people are, and this is kids in particular. They're really being affected by this. Do you think that there should be some level of regulation, or
I feel like that would be kind of hard to tackle. And again, maybe a tech person, right, would be able to kind of take on that task and see how they can monitor something like that. As far as for myself working at a school, I see that a lot of it transcends, right? It starts at the school level, or maybe it starts at home, and then you'll see it kind of roll over into the cyber world, right? So I think if you're the type of parent, like speaking as a parent and both as like a school counselor, right? If you have a good relationship with a student, right? And you are very aware of like how maybe their behaviors are changing or the sort of relationships that they have with other peers and not just like out of class what I am, but teachers, right? If they can see that maybe they're having some conflict with like a peer, it's being able to have that relationship to where that student feels comfortable to come up to you and say, hey, you know what? This is kind of what's going on. And now it's transcending to the social media world, right?
Yeah, so creating like a safe space so that people could speak up or go on
Yeah.
there. Yeah.
And it goes also with parents, right? Because I'm a mom of two. My boys are small and they're not using social media yet. But I think that if, as parents, we become a little bit more aware of the behaviors and kind of because you can see it, right? You can
Yeah.
see when a student is being targeted by the way that they're changing their behaviors. Maybe if that student or that child was really happy, and all of a sudden you see that their light is dimming a little bit, or they're a little bit more reserved. It's being able, as a parent, to have that relationship with your child and be able to recognize when something is happening and then going from there. But again, that's something really tough because I know that not everybody has that sort of relationship. And then when kids get to the teenage years, that's like a whole nother developmental leap that they take where it's completely normal for them to withdraw.
Correct.
Right. So it's
And I love that you said that because one thing that I try to do and I do every day when I pick up Audrey from school is I ask her a set of questions, and they're just neutral questions, but it's like, tell me something that made you happy, tell me something that made you sad. And it's just keeping that level of communication because I never had that.
Mhm.
I never knew how to express my emotions. I just kept all that anger inside of me to the point that it was going to burst, right? And it's kind of like you have to be strong, you can't show emotion, you can't show feeling. I'm the opposite. I'm an emotional person. I'm like, Audrey, I see you, I know when you're down, I need to make sure that you're okay. What do you need from me? What happened? And really talking about that. Another thing that I will say, Lisette, and I don't know if your kids were in school during COVID. I don't think so, right? They weren't
No.
COVID. Okay, so that's good. The reason I wanted to do an episode on mental health or this particular topic with technology, and I'm gonna share with you, is working within higher ed. And mental health was a huge thing coming out of COVID. We were seeing a lot of students not come back to college. We saw a lot of students stop out. And one of the biggest or most important issues in college campuses, while I was in this senior level, and this was across the nation, it was really related to college students that were facing challenges. And these were challenges ranging from academic pressures to it could be career uncertainty because people didn't know what was going to come out of it. And the other part, it could be financial and or education in the classroom. Give you an example. And this is for Audrey. Audrey got to taste a piece of that. She started her educational career in person. COVID happened, had to transition to online. COVID stopped, transition back to in person, right? And all in all, they're transitioning applications back and forth because to go remote, you have to go to a certain product or tool that they're using for schooling. And this was hard. Like I really take a step back and I'm like, wow, the resiliency behind Audrey to go back and forth and pivot. And at the end of the day, we're like, am I being too hard on her for like asking her to do more? I think about today's students and I think about, how do we prepare for tomorrow? And I'm just talking about what we witnessed and what we lived through. There was a lot of studies that came out, and there was a study that was done by Forbes and all these different educational sectors that said that it was like over 40% of the students felt like they were anxious, right, when it came to education. And I think about everything we touched on today, and we talk about social media, we see everything going on. We have to then look at our classroom. And one of the things that I find interesting is like this landscape that we're creating. Do you think that the education system at large, we don't have to speak about our respective fields, at large is providing the level of support or resources, or you think they're trying to?
I think that it really depends on the area that you're in,
Hmm.
because there are other areas that are a little bit more predominant and maybe have more of the resources to provide that support. I will say during COVID, right, that was that was really hard. That was really, really hard. And you're a doctor, right? And you have like all this education and different platforms and how to manage, different windows and all that good stuff. And our parents did not. So where I'm at, it's like a very impoverished community. And so that was our biggest challenge, was having enough people to support our parents at showing them how to navigate the different platforms.
Because I'm assuming during that time, parents had to serve a teacher role to some extent.
They did, yeah, and the platforms weren't user friendly. Because I mean, I feel like I'm pretty knowledgeable in technology, at least to be able to do the basics. And it was hard for me, right? It was hard for me to have to learn it, to then teach it to somebody who never had that exposure before.
And I love that you brought this up. A part of my research in my doctorate was there's some framework called the TAM model that they call, or the technology acceptance model. And when I was looking, and yes, Audrey was privileged, every tool that her school had, I reviewed. I was part of the board that would review it. And what I would look at is user friendliness. And acceptance to me, is this going to be so easy that the parents don't have to step it? Can the students do it themselves? Obviously you have to train them, but a one and done and, one click go through. That's one thing that I really focused on when I think about what technology or tools are we giving out there. Like, if it has too many clicks, think about Amazon, right? Mm-hmm. Amazon is so smart that they make this one click purchase to make it easier for you, right? Mm-hmm. I would want or hope that the educational sector or anyone that's developing these apps creates a model. And there's some good ones out there that have done this. But, that's one piece that I do take a step back and I acknowledge. And I see Audrey and I'm like, wow, she's really well versed with technology. And at the same time, though, it's now bringing them back to being in a in-person setting. That's also been complicated because now they have to socialize again. Mm. And it's been what, 2 years now, or a year and a half or something since I lost track.
Back?
Yes.
I want to say it's been maybe like 3 years. We're going on 3 years.
Wow. Yeah. See, that's how I'm all over the place. Another thing that I did want to engage you on, and I'm talking about, as I was thinking and reading an article on artificial intelligence and the mental health. There was an article that came out on an education week, and it talked about how students perceived AI and are they concerned with AI in their classroom or in their life. They're not. They're actually excited about it. However, faculty or teachers or administrators, they were a little bit, worried about it. And one of the points that were made in there, and I was like, this is a good point. A lot of the students that I see today, and even including myself, I'm in Instagram or I'm in all these different social media apps, and I get an advice from someone. And I'm speaking about, it could be mental health, it could be fitness related, but I'm getting advice and I'm taking that advice without consulting with a true professional. Maybe they are professionals, we don't know. Mm-hmm. And then I incorporate it into my regimen. A lot of the folks are like, how do you know that that's, accurate? And I'm talking about mental health, like they're actually self-diagnosing or getting this diagnosis from someone that's on TikTok or these. So do you think that what do you think about that, first of all?
That's terrible. Just because I feel that, like, for example, with AI. So I know one of the things that I've been seeing a lot, kind of like you, right, is like these for you pages, right, where it saw everything that you clicked on, everything that you're interested in, and then it tosses you some random video of some person. And so one of the things that I saw was health related. I just had a baby 3 months ago, so that is on my mind. And it said something about like, oh, if you know that cucumber or some random fruit or vegetable can help you lose like 10 pounds of,
yeah.
And then, and it's like, oh, and this doctor said it. And it's like a person with a coat, and it looks so real. Like it looks.
You want to go get the cucumbers?
Yes. You're like, oh my God, I need to go get this cucumber to lose all this fat. But like you said, it's happening. And unless you're able to truly detect, and I feel like now, because of the exposure of it, people are a little bit more, like they'll scrutinize it a little bit more. So if you look at the comment section, some people would be like, this is AI, right?
But the students don't look at the comment section. That's the part where kids just take it at heart. And I say this, you said something earlier too, and I'm bringing it back to what you mentioned earlier. They're seeing this world that they see as a perfect world they don't question it. They take it at face value and they turn around and they incorporate it. I think about that with mental health. Like, okay, first of all, I recommend that if you see this, bring it up to someone, a professional, and say, hey, I saw this. Do you recommend it for me or not? Right? That's just do your due diligence and make sure you get that opinion. But for everyone that's listening out there, they should also not only scrutinize it, but ask themselves or question themselves the validity of what they're seeing behind it. But there's just a lot out there today.
So much that we consume on a daily basis. And when it comes to mental health, I think that I wish that they could put like a disclaimer, like we are not we are not medical professionals, right? If you feel that this is you, please reach out to someone. But, that's in the perfect world, and unfortunately that doesn't happen all the time.
And I think that's the tough part, but as long as we provide that level of awareness, and I think this is another thing that I haven't been as involved, but I would hope that in K through 12 or even in college that they do help folks critically think and question all this different stuff. When I talk about AI, and this isn't tied to mental health, but when I think about AI, I always think about where we are today, and this is Gen AI or any forms of artificial intelligence, robotics. Where are we today? And, how are we tackling it? And are we ready for it? Right? Because it's here, it's going to stay. The reality, though, is how do we as professionals kind of provide that level of awareness and help be proactive about it instead of reactive? Because the train's going to sell. And before you know it, we did a disservice to our students. Instead of us helping them critically think and making them really challenge or test what they're seeing and consuming, instead of just saying, don't do it. Because we know if we tell a kid don't do it, they're going to be like, I'm going to do it. Yeah, I would do the same thing. It's really like, how do you help them or educate them, which is part of our jobs? Like, how do we help them go from A to B in a healthy way, right? And let them do their own level of research and assessment, because we're not going to, it's too large to stop. But there has to be some level of regulation or whatnot behind it.
Well, I think what could also be beneficial is training the adults in the children's lives, right? Because I know that at least where I'm at, we have some older teachers, that still don't know really how to operate like a computer. Like we have these huge whiteboards that are interactive and they have like a PC in them.
Oh yeah.
And they're so cool. But we have like the teachers that are like, how do I work this? Like,
Right.
I just want a whiteboard or a blackboard,
Chalkboard. Yeah,
right?
yeah, the chalkboards.
But it's being able to give them training, right? Just like they train them on how to use those boards, maybe looking into training on just like critical thinking when it comes to like social media or things like that, because it's very real. Like you said, our kids are exposed to it.
Correct.
And if they can't tell the difference between something that's total BS and something that's actual information that they can take in, then, that's just this gap gets wider, right?
And it's funny that you say this. It goes back to like, even as adults and professionals, we have our own bias and we have our own, what would the term be, like what we know, right? You brought up these, you have this amazing technology in your classroom. No one uses it. I was responsible to set for over 300 classrooms of AV innovative, and we redesigned them to be AV. And this was during the
What is
pandemic.
AV?
It's basically audiovisual, anything that we're using within the classroom, but it could be classroom tech,
Okay.
for short. But we updated during this project. It was all AV equipment. It was anything that was like the projector, a smart screen, or something of that nature. But we basically went top of the line, updated all these rooms or spaces, and needless to say, we came back to in person, and our faculty were like, where's my chalkboard? Where is this? And I really had to challenge them then and there and educate them. Goes back to training. I think training is super important and critical. And by all means, I always say this has to be part of your formula when you're deploying a new tool. They came back and I basically told them, a person like myself, I wear glasses. If I don't have my glasses, I can't see what's in there. But if everything is in a digital environment or it's digitized, I could, listen to it at a later time. I could consume that information. Opposed to writing on a chalkboard, it's a one and done. And some of us, my writing is terrible. From an accessibility perspective, I'd be like, fail, 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 fail. And maybe that's why I felt some of my classes as a kid. But that's one thing I think about. It's like, okay, there's the good, the bad, and the ugly, but we really need to like train, educate, and provide that level of awareness when it comes to technology, right? In any space, especially when it comes to our kids. I always think about Audrey, and that's my daughter. So I always think about her and I put her in any scenario, like, how do I do this in a way that's going to be for her or myself when I was growing up? Let's say it's, we talked a lot about all these different things behind technology. I'm curious to know from your stance, what do you think is the future of technology and mental health?
Hmm. I think that there's a lot of good that came from it during the pandemic. For example, telehealth, right?
Mm,
Telehealth is something that it's here to stay. It's here to stay as a clinician. I mean, a lot of clinicians prefer telehealth because it really limits the barriers that people have, right? If a person doesn't have transportation, or if they have a phone, they might be able to do telehealth, right? Or things like that. So I think that's something that really came from during the pandemic time, and it helped a lot because it kind of opened up services to a lot more people. So that was great. That was great. I know that for I'm not a practicing clinician. Like I
mm,
have my LCSW, but I don't have my private practice, and I don't do traditional therapy in my job, right? In my day to day. But I do know that some of my colleagues that are doing, the clinical work, they say that they use AI to help with like treatment plans and things like
mm,
that. You'll see, for example, especially if you work at a nonprofit, right? Something that happens with nonprofits is that you have a huge caseload and you don't have enough time to do the notes, right? And so what I've been hearing from my colleagues is that they use like Chat GPT, right? Treatment plan for anxiety. And then boom, 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 it gives them a treatment plan, and then they can take from it and create their own. Right. So I think that's beneficial
so it
because
kind of enhances already what they know to that level of
yes.
support.
Well,
Nice.
because they can take from it, right, and then generate what it because every treatment plan is different, right, to the person. It's based on individual need,
Yeah.
so you can't generalize it. That's the thing. You can't
Yeah.
generalize it,
You
and
can't
so
self-diagnose
no,
everyone the same.
you cannot ask ChatGPT to treat your anxiety. But I know that that's how they're using it in the clinical setting. So that's as far as I'm, more aware of right now. Like I said, I've been at home with my little one, and I'm just about to, jump right back into my work mind. But I do know that that's something that they have been using.
And as you were talking, there was this movie. I forgot the name with Megan Fox. Just came out on Netflix. She's she's playing as an AI. Just letting you know, she's playing as an AI robot.
Oh,
And one thing that she serves is not only like she's a house caretaker, but she's also a kind of like a mental health support person, a doctor, because she's an AI. So she's pretty much diagnosing how you feel, like your emotions, your stress levels, and all this stuff. And I'm like, are we gonna get there? I think we, depends how. I think we will. When I see things like that, I go back to like when I first started thinking about iRobot, right? Elon Musk stealing all the things that came out from Will Smith. That's all his Tesla bots that came out of it. But here we are now, and I'm like, I saw that movie, and I was like, wow, is that how it's gonna be? Having a robot in front of you that's gonna look at you and say, "Hey, Jesus, you're feeling upset. You need to take some of these meds right now." I'm just thinking, like, where is this gonna be? Where are we gonna be in the future when it comes to technology? I will say, like, at current state, from my perspective, there's a lot of access, a lot of applications like the Calm app
mhm.
that I always look into to make sure that, I'm checking myself, monitoring myself, and trying to be positive, right? I think at the end of the day, we need to be mindful that we do have life. Life is not easy, it's stressful. But I always try to go back to the kids. The Calm app for a kid, I don't know if they'll use it. They really look to us to help them get calm or support them when it comes to that. But I always wanted to think like, where is this going to take us to? Where are we going to be 10, 20 years from now with all these different innovations coming in? And also looking at, how our kids are currently interacting with technology, right?
Yeah.
They're so dependent on technology that I'm like, what happens if it just shuts off? How do we suffer as
We
human
gotta
beings?
be parents. No, I'm just kidding.
We have to be parents. No more,
I will
no more iPad
no more
taking care.
iPad time. I will say that one of the challenges that I've been seeing right now with my son, right? He's in kindergarten. He's still he's just started, but he's so good at the tablet, right? And he has like all these different learning apps, and he's able to trace with the learning app
Mm,
with his finger, but his penmanship is
yeah.
terrible, terrible. And his penmanship is like, you cannot read it. And I'm like, and the teacher
He's gonna
told
be a
us,
doctor.
no, probably because the teacher did mention, he's super smart. He's super smart. He's one of the more, higher
Advanced, yeah.
achieving students. But the penmanship part, right? Let's work on that, okay? But that's just, because he's a tech baby. So cutting things, that doesn't interest him.
Oh
Like
wow.
tracing, he hates it. And like we have to fight every day, but it's like you need good penmanship. Like
Well, I'll tell you something, and I don't know if it's me and him or him and me, but when I was a kid, I could not do none of that stuff, right?
really.
And oh, you would make me sit down, I couldn't focus. But if you gave me or you helped me, told me to build something, I had the most patience. Like,
Yeah.
I think then and there you start to kind of observe and see who your kid is and
Yeah.
what it is that they like. And it's going to be up to you. Like, how do you help balance it?
Mm.
But at the same time, how do you also make them excel in what they enjoy and love, right? For me, it's like, and I remember thinking back when Audrey was doing her work and it was pretty much all because of COVID. It was remote. I thought she didn't like to read books. Like, and one day I'm like, you know what? The libraries were closed. So they opened up. I went to the library and she just sat down and read books. Ever since then, she's read more books than I have my entire life. It's like,
Goodness,
I'm
that's
like,
wonderful.
yeah, but I didn't know. Like, I didn't know what I didn't know. And, here I am like, wow, like I was trying to m- put me in her, but she's herself, right?
Yeah.
And I said, okay, I need to make sure that I expose that piece of her and helped her excel in it, but also help her with the other parts along the way. Any final words, Lisette? I know we've been talking a lot about some great stuff. Do you have any final closing words for
There's
us?
so much to talk about. I
Yeah.
love talking about mental health and technology as a new spin to it, right? I did want to mention, because I know you said something about in the future, right? The next 20 years, kind of having the robot be your therapist, right? I know that I don't see it. I'm sorry, I don't
Mm,
see it happening just because, and it's not, because that's what I do, but I feel like mental health is not black and white,
mm,
right? It's very gray, it's very individualized. It has to do with, intersection of different identities that we have, and you can't generalize it. That's the biggest thing. And you have to be able to pivot, because sometimes you might be treating a patient for, say, anxiety, and as you're treating them, all of a sudden something new comes up, and you have to be able to pivot, right? And so I feel like that's kind of the issue that I have with like evidence-based practices sometimes, is that it can be so black and white, to
correct.
where this is how the treatment model goes and you have to follow it to a T. But humans don't work that way. Right? And so I don't foresee it. I don't foresee it in the future. I don't. I mean, who knows? Maybe it will, but it's just.
And maybe it's a portion of it, not all of it, because I think there's uniqueness to everything.
Mhm.
But you're right. Maybe I also don't know to what extreme, right? Because every human being has their own, and to me, everyone has their own unique abilities, their own unique health, right? And they have to be diagnosed in the way that's only catered to them without looking at data. Because when you think about anything with technology, it is informed by data. And data could be from a pool of international, over 1 million people, billion people, 2 billion people, or it could be pulled based on race, ethnicity, right? It could be all these different levels that come from data, and data could not be reflective. It's not black and white tied to that specific person. But again, it could be the good and the bad. And it's like, how do you, maybe people by that time might have the robot and a doctor to like do that.
A
I
psychiatrist
mean,
to give me my meds, and
yes,
and the robot to validate my feelings.
yes. Or they're already having that. It's called social media. It's in the phone. With that, I do want to say, Lisette, we are coming to a conclusion for the show. Lisette, I do want to thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your valuable insights. It's been a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you, everyone, for listening to Tequi Vida today. Have a good one.